I'm Shane White, and this is The Process.
Hey gang, Shane Patrick White here with another edition of The Process. On today's edition of the Rare Book Tour, we take a look at Alphonse Mucha. There was a book I purchased a long time ago written by Jiri Mucha, the son of Alphonse Mucha. Probably one of the best books available on this godfather of Art Nouveau. The guy was a real machine when it came to producing work for both commercial endeavors as well as his fine art pursuits. He's the quintessential artist in that regard. As artists, we're always trying to find that balance of keeping food on the table and self-expression. He worked for every inch of his success and probably had one of the biggest impacts on any era. Here's a small excerpt about his life from Wikipedia. Alphonse Mucha, known as Alphonse Mucha, was a Czech painter, illustrator, and graphic artist living in Paris during the Art Nouveau period, best known for his distinctly stylized and decorative theatrical posters of Sarah Bernhardt. He produced illustrations, advertisements, decorative panels, and designs which became among the best-known images of the period. In the second part of his career, at the age of 43, he returned to his homeland and devoted himself to painting a series of 20 monumental canvases known as the Slav Epic, depicting the history of all Slavic people of the world, which he painted between 1912 and 1926. In 1928, on the 10th anniversary of the independence of Czechoslovakia, he presented the series to the Czech nation. He considered it his most important work. It is now on display in the National Gallery in Prague. Alphonse Mucha was born on July 24, 1860, in the small town of Ivančić in southern Moravia, then a province of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, currently a region of the Czech Republic. His family had a very modest income. His father was a court usher, and his mother was a miller's daughter. He showed an early talent for drawing. A local merchant, impressed by his work, provided him with paper for free, though it was considered a luxury. Mucha became a chorister at the Cathedrals St. Peter and Paul, Brno, where he received his secondary school education. He became devoutly religious and wrote later, "For me, the notions of painting, going to church, and music are so closely knit that often I cannot decide whether I like church for its music or music for its place in the mystery which it accompanies." He grew up in an environment of intense Czech nationalism in all the arts, from music to literature and painting. He designed flyers and posters for patriotic rallies. His singing abilities allowed him to continue his musical education at the Gymnasium Brno in the Moravian capital of Brno, but his true ambition was to become an artist. He found some employment designing theatrical scenery and other decorations. In 1878, he applied without success to the Academy of Fine Arts in Prague, but was rejected and advised to find a different career. In 1880, at the age of 19, he traveled to Vienna, the political and cultural capital of the empire, and found employment as an apprentice scenery painter for a company which made sets for Vienna theaters. While in Vienna, he discovered the museums, churches, palaces, and especially theaters, for which he received free tickets from his employer. He also discovered Hans Makart, a very prominent academic painter who created murals for many of the palaces and government buildings in Vienna, and was a master of portraits and historical paintings in grand format. His style turned Mucha in that artistic direction and influenced his later work. He also began experimenting with photography, which became an important tool in his later work. To his misfortune, a terrible fire in 1881 destroyed the Ring Theater, the major client of his firm. Later in 1881, almost without funds, he took a train as far north as his money would take him. He arrived in Mikulov in southern Moravia and began making portraits, decorative art, and lettering for tombstones. His work was appreciated, and he was commissioned by Count Edward Cohen Balassi, a local landlord and nobleman, to paint a series of murals for his residence at Emmerhof Castle, and then at his ancestral home in the Tyrol, Gandig Kass. The paintings at Emmerhof were destroyed by fire in 1948, but his early versions in small format exist now on display at the museum in Brno. He showed his skill at mythological themes, the female form, and less vegetal decoration. Balassi, who was also an amateur painter, took Mucha on expeditions to see art in Venice, Florence, and Milan, and introduced him to many artists, including the famous Bavarian romantic painter Wilhelm Krey, who lived in Munich. Count Balassi decided to bring Mucha to Munich for formal training and paid his tuition and cost of living at the Munich Academy of Fine Arts. He moved there in September 1885. It is not clear how Mucha actually studied at the academy. There is no record of his being enrolled as a student there. However, he did become friends with a number of notable Slavic artists there, including the Czechs Karel Vyacheslav Masek, Ludek Merold, and the Russian Leonard Pasternak, father of the famous novelist Boris Pasternak. He founded a Czech student club and contributed political illustrations to nationalist publications in Prague. In 1886, he received a notable commission for painting of the Czech patron saints Cyril and Methodius from a group of Czech immigrants, including some of his relatives, who had founded an Orthodox church in the town of Písek, North Dakota. He was very happy with the artistic environment of Munich. He wrote to friends, "Here I am in my new element, painting. I cross all sorts of currents, but without effort and even with joy. Here, for the first time, I can find the objectives to reach which used to seem inaccessible." However, he found he could not remain forever in Munich. The Bavarian authorities imposed increasing restrictions upon foreign students and residents. Count Balassi suggested that he travel either to Rome or Paris. With Balassi's financial support, he decided in 1887 to move to Paris. Mucha moved to Paris in 1888, where he enrolled in the Académie Julian, and the following year, in 1889, Académie Colarassi. The two schools taught a wide variety of different styles. His first professors at the Académie Julian were Jules Lefebvre, who specialized in female nudes and allegorical paintings, and Jean-Paul Laurens, whose specialties were historical and religious paintings in a realistic and dramatic style. At the end of 1889, as he approached the age of 30, his patron, Count Balassi, decided that Mucha had received enough education and ended his subsidies. When he arrived in Paris, Mucha found shelter with the help of the large Slavic community. He lived in a boarding house called the Creamery at 13 Rue de la Grande Chaumerie, whose owner, Charlotte Caron, was famous for sheltering struggling artists. When needed, she accepted paintings or drawings in place of rent. Mucha decided to follow the path of another Czech painter he knew from Munich, Ludwig Marold, who made a successful career as an illustrator for magazines. In 1890 and 1891, he began providing illustrations for the weekly magazine La Vie Populaire, which published novels in weekly segments. His illustration for a novel by Guy de Maupassant called The Useless Beauty was on the cover for the May 22, 1890 edition. He also made illustrations for Le Petit Français Illustre, which published stories for young people in both magazine and book form. For this magazine, he provided dramatic scenes of battles and other historic events, including a cover illustration of a scene from the Franco-Prussian War, which was on the January 23, 1892 edition. His illustrations began to give him a regular income. He was able to buy a harmonium to continue his musical interests and his first camera, which used glass plate negatives. He took pictures of himself and his friends and also regularly used it to compose his drawings. He became friends with Paul Gauguin and shared a studio with him for a time when Gauguin returned from Tahiti in the summer of 1893. In late autumn 1894, he also became friends with the playwright August Strindberg, whom he had common interests in philosophy and mysticism. His magazine illustrations led to book illustrations. He was commissioned to provide illustrations for scenes and episodes of German history by historian Charles Segnabos. 4 of his illustrations, including one depicting the death of Frederick Barbarossa, were chosen for display at the 1894 Paris Salon of Artists. He received a Medal of Honor, his first official recognition. Mucha added another important client in the early 1890s, the Central Library of Fine Arts, which specialized in the publication of books about art, architecture, and the decorative arts. It later launched a new magazine in 1897 called Art et Décoration, which played an early and important role in publicizing the Art Nouveau style. He continued to publish illustrations for his other clients, including illustrating a children's book of poetry by Eugene Manuel and illustrations for a magazine of the theater arts called Le Costume au Théâtre. In March 1904, Mucha sailed for New York and the beginning of his first visit to the United States. His intent was to find funding for his grand project, the Slav Epic, which he had conceived during the 1900 Exposition. He had letters of introduction from Baroness Solomon de Rothschild. When he landed in New York, he was already a celebrity in the United States. His posters had been widely displayed during Sarah Bernhardt's annual American tour since 1896. He rented a studio near Central Park in New York, made portraits, and gave interviews and lectures. He also made contact with Pan-Slavic organizations. At one Pan-Slavic banquet in New York City, he met Charles Richard Crane, a wealthy businessman and philanthropist who was a passionate Slavophile. He commissioned Mucha to make a portrait of his daughter in a traditional Slavic style. More important, he shared Mucha's enthusiasm for a series of monumental paintings on Slavic history and became Mucha's most important patron. When Mucha designed the Czechoslovak bills, he used his portrait of Crane's daughter as the model for Slavia for the 100 koruna bill. From New York, he wrote to his family in Moravia, "You must have been very surprised by my decision to come to America, perhaps even amazed, but in fact, I had been preparing to come here for some time. It had become clear to me that I would never have time to do the things I wanted to do if I did not get away from the treadmill of Paris. I would be constantly bound to publishers and their whims. In America, I don't expect to find wealth, comfort, or fame for myself, only the opportunity to do some more useful work." He still had commissions to complete in France and returned to Paris at the end of May 1904. He finished his commissions and returned to New York in early January 1905 and made 4 more trips between 1905 and 1910, usually staying for 5 to 6 months. In 1906, he returned to New York with his wife, Maria Chitalova, whom he had married on June 10, 1906, in Prague. He remained in the U.S. until 1909. Their first child, Jaroslava, was born in New York in 1909. His principal income in the United States came from teaching. He taught illustration and design at the New York School of Applied Design for Women, at the Philadelphia School of Art for 5 weeks, and became a visiting professor at the Art Institute of Chicago. He rejected most commercial proposals, but accepted one proposal in 1906 to design boxes in a store display for Alphonse Mucha, a soap bar. In 1908, he also undertook one large decoration project for the interior of the German Theater of New York. He produced 3 large allegorical murals in the Art Nouveau style, representing tragedy, comedy, and truth. Besides the decoration, he made graphic designs, stage, and costume designs. Artistically, the trip was not a success. Portrait painting was not his strong point, and the German theater closed in 1909, 1 year after it opened. He made posters for the American actress Leslie Carter, known as the American Sarah Bernhardt, and the Broadway star Maude Adams, but they were largely echoes of his Bernhardt posters. His finest work in America is often considered to be his portrait of Josephine Crane Bradley, the daughter of his patron, and the character of Slavia, in Slavic costume and surrounded by symbols from Slavic folklore and art. His contact with Crane made possible his most ambitious artistic project, the Slav epic. In the political turmoil of the 1930s, Mucha's work received little attention in Czechoslovakia. However, in 1936, a major retrospective was held in Paris at the Jeu de Paume Museum with 139 works, including 3 canvases from the Slav epic. Hitler and Nazi Germany began to threaten Czechoslovakia in the 1930s. Mucha began work on a new series, a triptych depicting the Age of Reason, the Age of Wisdom, and the Age of Love, which he worked on from 1936 to 1938, but never completed. On March 15, 1939, the German army paraded through Prague, and Hitler, at Prague Castle, declared the German protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. Mucha's role as a Slav nationalist and Freemason made him a prime target. He was arrested, interrogated for several days, and released. But then his health was broken. He contracted and died of pneumonia on July 14, 1939, a few weeks before the outbreak of the Second World War. Though public gatherings were banned, a huge crowd attended his interment in the Slavic monument of Vysohrad Cemetery. If you like my channel, please subscribe today or tell a friend. And as always, thanks for watching.